I'm Jack Stripling, host of College Matters from the Chronicle. We debuted the podcast in fall of 2024, and the world has changed a ton since then. The primary goal of the podcast remains the same. We are trying to understand the world through the lens of higher education. So everything we cover on College Matters is about trying to dig more deeply into why a story is important. The first question I often ask myself is, what is this story really about? And an example of this would be a conversation I had with Becky Supiano recently, who's a reporter at the Chronicle. We were talking about grade inflation. This is a perennial topic in higher education, and some research shows us that grades are indeed going up. But at the same time, the place the podcast goes is a little different, which is a question about, why do we care so much about grades? What does our obsession with grade inflation really tell us about the mood of the country or the underlying anxieties that people have about meritocracy in the United States? And so that's the goal of the podcast, is always to take the news and move a step further into meaning. So this podcast is, of course, for people who are familiar with the Chronicle of Higher Education, our core audience, administrators, faculty, but it's also for, I would say, anybody who really cares about the life of the mind. A lot of the things we talk about on the podcast are about the ways students are learning, the anxieties of the country, people's preoccupations with things like merit and parenting, and how are you going to be a better human being in 2025 if AI is taking over your job? These are deeper questions that go well beyond higher education, and higher education is really the entry point for us for these types of conversations. So anyone who has a stake in higher education, either directly or has a stake in being a human being in 2025, really might get something out of this conversation.